Good evening, everybody. My name is E.R. Anderson. I'm the executive director of Karis Circle. Karis Circle is the nonprofit programming arm of Karis Books, and Karis Books is the South's oldest independent feminist bookstore. I'm delighted to be with all of you tonight, wherever in the world you are watching from, to celebrate my Monticello, Jocelyn Nicole Johnson's brand new book. We are joined today by C. Morgan Babst, who is our interviewer and conversation partner tonight. Morgan is a native of New Orleans. Her debut novel, The Floating World, was named one of the best books of 2017 by Kirkus, Amazon, Southern Living, and the Dallas Morning News, and was a New York Times editor's pick. Morgan studied writing at Yale and NYU, and her essays and short fiction have appeared in the Washington Post, Savoir, the Oxford American, Guernica, Garden and Gun, the Harvard Review, Lenny Letter, and the anthology Horse Girls, among others. She currently teaches in the Creative Writing Workshop at the University of New Orleans and serves on the board of the Tennessee Williams Literary Festival. So welcome, Morgan. Thank you for being here. And thank you also to the Auburn Avenue Research Library on African American Culture and History. Folks will see that Morris Gardner is dropping knowledge in the chat. I expect that tonight will actually offer us a number of intertextual resources. So, keep your eyes on our main conversation and reading here, but definitely go back and check all of the links because there is a wealth of riches to be had over there. These links will stay up in perpetuity, so you don't need to rush. You can revisit them later if you like. You can also ask questions at any time by clicking the Ask a Question box. And the person we're here to celebrate tonight is Jocelyn Nicole Johnson. Her writing has appeared in Guernica, The Guardian, Phoebe, Prime Number Magazine, and elsewhere. Her short story, Control Negro, was anthologized in Best American Short Stories 2018, guest edited by Roxanne Gay, and read live by LeVar Burton as part of PRI's Selected Shorts series. Johnson has been a fellow at Hedgebrook, Tin House Summer Workshops, and VCCA. A veteran public school art teacher, Johnson lives and writes in Charlottesville, Virginia. And we are especially excited because Sarah Look, who's a co-owner of Karis Books, served as the chair of the committee of independent booksellers across the country who helped choose My Monticello as a Indies Introduced book pick. It was a top choice. And so it's really special that we get to celebrate with you tonight. Jocelyn, we're really, really honored. So I'm going to get out of the way and we're going to start off with a reading from the book and then go right into a conversation. So thanks so much for being with us and congratulations on all your success.
Thank you, ER. All right. So hi, everybody. Thank you so much for coming out. I'm going to just start by reading from My Monticello. It's 5 short stories and a novella that takes up the majority of the book. And I'm going to read from one of the stories called Virginia is Not Your Home. I'm going to read from the beginning, so you don't really need to know anything, but the idea of home, belonging, of confronting history, both your personal history and bigger history, is the theme throughout the book. Virginia is not your home. They hung that name on you at birth, but Virginia was never your home. Read Nausea by Sartre and give yourself a new one. Trumpet your new name from the liver-spotted washroom mirror like a coronation. Gape your mouth and angle your tongue behind your teeth. While you're at it, work to remedy those other afflictions, that fetid high-hill R that has planted itself in the middle of words like wash. Scrub the stink of manure from your clothing, and while your young body churns over the basin, keep whispering your new, still secret name. Believe that if you can just change this, you can change everything. When your furtive girl body begins to unfold, pull your hair back so severely that the boys don't tug you down beneath the bleachers. Take to wearing father's faded stable flannels to ward off solicitations to their string of tissue paper dances. Don't accept it when they ask, "Who do you think you are?" whenever you test some sweet protracted word on your tongue. Don't accept the moldy hymnals, the marquee salvations, the wayward way that mama courts heaven like a scornful lover, Don't ache too badly for the milk cows in the pasture, their slit contoured ribs pressing through. Take French, lock your doors, and trust in your own 16-year-old self. I think I'm going to stop there. Hi.
Oh, it's so beautiful to see you read. Ugh. It's really such a pleasure to sort of be in like at least virtual presence with you. I feel like we've known each other for years now in like a sort of strange attenuated way.
Yeah, it's so nice to see you, to actually see you. Yeah, we've emailed and corresponded, but we haven't really even been in virtual space together, really.
Yeah. I mean, I still remember where I was sitting when I read Control Negro for the first time. I was a volunteer reader for the slush at Guernica, and I was kind of having a dull day lying on the sofa in my living room, being like, oh, reject, 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 maybe in progress. And then I clicked on your piece and I was like, Control Negro. Shit. And then I sat all the way up and I read it through, and then I read it through again. It felt like a bomb had gone off in my brain. It was so incredibly powerful. And of course, everyone who's read it since has felt the same way. I mean, I got letters from all of the editors at Guernica telling me like, oh my God, what did you just find? Roxane Gay was on Twitter like very soon after it was published saying, oh my God, who is this? I mean, my dad said that. Netflix has said that. It's been like watching a rocket launch, seeing your writing enter the world. And I wonder how that feels to you.
Well, I have to say that story was kind of the beginning of this whole collection in a way, even though there's one story that predates it. Not only the attention that story got, which was great, it was so nice to have it be accepted somewhere where that was really appreciated and then accepted, and then shout out from Roxane Gay. That's always a really fabulous day. And then, you know, some of the other things that happened, and then being anthologized in Best American, where people really pay it, you know, it's an anthology that people teach from and look to, so it really got more eyeballs on the story, has been fabulous. And then that became kind of my dropping off place to think about what are the themes I want to write about and how do I want to formulate some of the other stories and pull in, maybe I pulled in one story that was before that into this collection. So it feels really nice when anyone is excited about what you're writing and wants to engage with it and is interested in it. I mean, even my parents really love that story, and they like made people in their lives read it. And, you know, they had some people have really strong reactions in a good way and really come back and say, you know, just interesting things. One really great story is one of their, somebody they knew that, you know, they had a business relationship with read it. And he said, so in the story, just for those of you who haven't read it, there's a professor who is like a Frankenstein-like professor who's testing racism by kind of running this experiment on his own son to see if America's promise of kind of privilege could protect a Black child too, if this child was so, you know, perfect that America couldn't find fault in him unless we placed it there. At any rate, this and against these average American Caucasian males, and this person said, am I an ACM? You know, he said, am I that person who has privilege? It made him think about his own privilege, which is kind of amazing, actually. So it feels really good. It feels really good to have attention. It feels great to have a debut out. So thank you for talking to me about him.
Yeah, and I mean, having it connect in that really real and important and powerful way, like that must be so incredibly gratifying. I mean, personally, I swooned when I saw that LeVar Burton was reading it on stage.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, as a book nerd raised by reading Rainbow, that's just seems extra special. And it made me wonder, like, what were the things in your childhood that brought you up as a writer and a reader?
It's so funny. I definitely was a reader, and my parents were thoughtful people. They had both been teachers as their first jobs, and you know, there were books around, but I just was always interested in making things. I was really interested in visual arts. I was really interested in stories. for a long time, I had a pinned tweet on my Twitter, which was literally I'd taken a school picture and written, "This is the artist. This is the author. She was 7 when she made this." So at 7 years old, not only was I trying to create like my author page for my little book of drawings, but also I knew to do it in third person. Like I was like copying something, right? So I was thinking about this idea of intention, even though no one ever, it wasn't going out anywhere in the world. It was just in my own imagination. So I just was drawn to that stuff really early, and really not with so much of a sense of audience, but just with an interest in what stories could be and what they could do. And so I've been doing it a really long time.
Yeah. You've been a teacher of visual arts in the public schools in Virginia for 20 years now, I think. Is that right?
That is true. Yes.
I wonder, how does the practice of visual art and the practice of writing, how do they interrelate?
Well, that's really interesting. I'll just say for those of you out there, C. Morgan's video might go out some, but we can still hear her, so we're good to go, and she'll hopefully come back soon. So yes, I've taught visual arts for 20 years in Virginia. I'm not teaching now, just since I sold my book in the summer of 2020 amidst the pandemic and everything else that was happening then. But before that, and while I was writing, I was teaching art to children, to young children in public schools, which I absolutely love. And what I'll say is, I think there is something about it being the same muscle, that idea of trying to tell stories and thinking about character and thinking about place and thinking about a presentation of yourself and what ideas you want to bring forward. But also for me, a lot of the relationship between writing and teaching was just about being part of a community in a specific way. So being a public school teacher is amazing because you have access to people and individuals and all kinds of individuals and families and that you might not, see in your regular circles. That's part of the beauty of the experiment of public education when it's working well. And even sometimes when it's not working well, you're pressed together with a group of people and you're forced to create community there. And so in my fiction, not only did I draw on just knowing and seeing people all day, striving, struggling, doing great things, coming together. And that was just like a great source of inspiration kind of constantly. But also I really drew on this idea of how to build community, for example, in the novella that is at the end of the story. So my Monticello, the novella for which the whole collection is named, is the story of a diverse group of Charlottesville neighbors who kind of flee Charlottesville after marauding white supremacists attack their neighborhood, and they flee in this little bus up, and they end up going up to Monticello, Thomas Jefferson's plantation home, to take refuge there. And they're led by an imagined Black descendant of Thomas Jefferson and Sally Hemings. So in the story, I have all these people and I have to bring them together. And so in my imagination, I thought, well, how do you bring people together? Well, as a teacher, you kind of create this document, you get buy-in, and you say, what are we willing to do for one another? On the first day of school, if you've ever been in a classroom, if you've taught, there's this way that teachers do that. And I use that in the story as well. Yeah.
Denisha, who's the protagonist of My Monticello, am I saying that right?
Yeah, I say, like, if you think Nene is her nickname, so Denisha. Yeah.
Denisha. She reminded me so much of Lauren from Parable of the Sower. She's in Octavia Butler's wonderful book. She is a very young woman, but she's extremely courageous and knows how to lead and to bring people together in this, in the most extreme circumstances. And actually, there are so many courageous and powerful women in this book. If she reminded me of Lauren, the character who is the speaker in Buying a House Ahead of the Apocalypse, reminded me of myself. I'm currently dealing with rain in my house and flooding and all kinds of stuff. And I wondered what the inspirations were for all of these incredible female characters that you've written.
Oh my gosh. Well, it's just, one thing I wanted and one thing I like about the collection is there's a lot of different kinds of voices. And even within the women who lead those stories, who are both Black women, they're different people. And, that kind of variety of the kinds of, strong female characters that you can have. Definitely in the novella, we have this kind of more central heroine because we're in this really like apocalyptic fight really in that novel. But in Buying a House, I think that's funny that you say she reminds me of you, because I think that character is the most that I feel the most close to and feels most like me in my real life. None of the characters are autobiographical, but just her thoughts and fears about the world. So Buying a House Ahead of the Apocalypse is probably the shortest story in the collection. It's in the form of a list because I'm a compulsive list maker. I have all kinds of lists, and then I put a post-it on my list and I make a list on that. And like, it's just like, and it has, my list contain really mundane things like, take out the garbage. And then it has, and then it has these really like more, be a good person, make sure your kid is okay, so this kind of confluence of really mundane things and these really important things kind of converge in this form and trying to have control over the world. And so in that story, the character is thinking about apocalypse, thinking about how the world might literally, environmentally and socially be falling apart around her, but still wanting to own her first house at 40 and wanting to have a safe place for her daughter in the world, and wanting to have like a good hairstyle for the apocalypse. If everything's going to fall apart, what is she going to do with her hair? And wanting to, have clothes that are comfortable and safe, just all the things we want kind of pressed up against one another in this strange configuration.
Yeah. It's funny how extremity does that to you, where you think maybe in advance of an extreme situation that it only matters that you get all your people out alive. But actually, you also want your shoes, it turns out, and you want to know where you're going to eat when you get somewhere else. It's very bizarre, this idea of apocalypse. I think that we tend to think of it as something in the future, something that is maybe coming for us, or maybe can be averted. But in reality, there's apocalypses and catastrophes happening all over the world all the time. I think that that's something that your fiction really brings home, and that a lot of these things happen in a sort of distorted reality. Just like one thing is clicked a little bit off, as in Control Negro maybe, or my Monticello is the time is moved a few decades into the future. But these stories all seem to be telling the truth to me in a way that realist fiction, which as Amitav Ghosh in The Great Derangement brings to our attention, is really often a tool of hegemony, and it presents these sort of normative fantasies about what people in power want the world to look like, or want people to think the world really looks like, when meanwhile there are wars everywhere and natural disasters everywhere. I was interested in how you just turn the dial in certain places to make that truth come through to us. And I was wondering, from a rhetorical perspective, how you think about conveying reality in fiction.
It's really interesting, because I think, some people have described, especially in the novella, as speculative fiction, or, there is this conceit that it's in the near future, but to me, the future feels so close it could be tomorrow. It's not a future that is unrecognizable. In fact, even in the few years since I wrote it, I feel like we've come closer to that reality, unfortunately. And so for me, it is about getting at the feeling and the experience of truth. I do think when you're experiencing something in a story or in art or in a movie, there's a way in which distorting and pressing on the details can make it feel more real, and there are ways in which it can make it feel less real. And I hope to, and what I wanted to do was to press on things in such a way that they felt more real, and they felt more accessible, and the feeling of it could feel real. Because I think when something's happening to you, there's a way in which it feels so much more real. Even small catastrophes, like losing someone you love, which is something we will all do, but it is a really big deal. Or small joys, like bringing a person in the world. It's, when you become a parent, however that might be, if you are, or when you fall in love, or when you lose your virginity, or whatever it is. Those are really big moments, even though they're very normal human moments. And I think that fiction, when it's done right, can press on those things. And one way that I've done it, for example, in that story, Buying a House Ahead of the Apocalypse, where it's the list of all the things, she talks about worrying about, basically environmental collapse, but she talks about waking up floating near the ceiling. Well, is she really floating near the ceiling? Probably not. But this idea that, the world is drowning a little bit. So it's, it helps you get at that feeling that I have in the middle of the night when I wake up worrying about, the planet and so forth.
Yeah. As somebody who wakes up feeling like she's maybe floating near the ceiling a lot, I really appreciated that. Because I do think that there's a pressure on fiction writers to avoid the extreme, avoid those feelings of fear and panic, and even in our own lives, to say like, oh, these fears that we have are unrealistic. That's not actually going to happen to us. Which, when those things do happen to us, the fact that you've been in denial about it for so long makes it much more difficult to cope or to survive, I think.
That's so interesting. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to jump in there.
No, please.
But it makes me think of two things. One is that, I didn't get an MFA, but I've gone to a lot of workshops. I've had, the good fortune and the ability to go to summer workshops at like Ten House, and to talk to writers who have more access to like a traditional MFA situation. I know there's all kinds of writers, and just writers who've been writing a long time and thought about writing. And I don't think I have that barrier. I'm sure there's people who've turned up their nose to things I've done slightly in workshop, but it wasn't pressed on the same way I think it might have been if I'd come through a more formal setting. And so I think that, there's always things lost and things gained by the paths you take, but I think there's a freedom that I feel like I had to not try to be too contained in what I wanted to talk about, or I don't know. That's just interesting. I thought that was interesting what you said. Made me think about that.
Yeah.
I diverged.
No. This is the idea. Having published a book about Hurricane Katrina, and watching it like slowly get kind of taken into like a weird genre that like there's this really weird guy on Twitter who really wants the word cli-fi to be important. And so he's constantly, pushing things into that basket, which then has kind of pushed that conversation into this idea that climate is some sort of science fiction concept. That all these things, the idea of the Statue of Liberty, with only her torch above the water, is like similar to like Planet of the Apes in terms of its realism. I hope that we're beginning to move away from that and into, just sort of the reality of what's happening to us and globally now. And so I do think that it's beginning to degrade, and I'm really grateful that that a voice like yours is unfettered by those old constructions. There's so much freedom in this book. Just the fact that there's a novella in here is wonderful. Like, I haven't read a novella in so long. I wonder, were there novellas that you admired that encouraged you to write in that form?
No, I honestly started writing that story as a shorter story, and it just became what it became because it needed to be scaffolded out more. I kind of had the whole basic story, but the middle was really needed to be expanded. And so I didn't set out to write a novella. I just kept saying, well, it needs this, it needs that. And it slowly became apparent that it would be too long to fit neatly into a short story. But I still think it uses and kept a lot of the conventions and conceits of short stories, just in the sense that there's a focus in it and there's kind of a building in it, and it has a kind of story-like spaces. I don't know, there's just something about it that reminds me of that. So I kind of tried to maintain that because it felt right for that particular story. Yeah. And what you were saying also about that reluctance to talk about apocalypse reminds me almost of, this is totally a little tangent, but I was listening to a podcast about The Body Keeps Score, that book that talks about trauma and how people's bodies remember trauma, but there's a way in which our minds want to make the story fit into the convention of the world. And I think that can be true for certain writers within fiction, and just for human beings. It's hard to imagine and to get your mind around the idea of apocalypse. It's much easier to create a story that, false as it may be, that protects what's already valued around you, and people will laud that story and they will praise you for it, and you will feel comfortable even when your body is screaming to you and waking you up in the middle of the night and saying, these other things really need attending to, and this isn't really true. And so I think that can happen. And I think for me, it was kind of the opposite. My body was like, these are the stories you need to tell, and you're going to share your panic with other people because this is true too, and this is true, and it needs attention. And so it almost pushed me towards writing about those things that were unspeakable or aren't the stories that are always being given the attention or care, at least in the ways that I might want to do it. So that's part of the reason I wrote it the way I did.
Yeah. That makes so much sense. I remember talking or emailing with you around the time of the Unite the Right. They want to call it a rally. It wasn't a rally. About how shocking and horrific the white supremacist terror and violence were. And I mean, it was right down the street from you, I guess. And I was struck reading my Monticello how much of that reality entered your fiction there. I mean, it's set a few decades into the future, but history repeats itself. White terrorists overtake the city, and nobody stops them this time. And I wondered how you managed to turn that trauma into fiction, what it did for you, and what you hope that it will do.
Yeah, so the novella, My Monticello, is definitely a reaction to August 12th. I live in Charlottesville, Virginia, and many of you may remember and know that was one of the early rallies that kind of we saw echoed in like the storming of the Capitol, similar style rally rally or protest or whatever you want to call it. But for us in Charlottesville, it wasn't just a weekend of people coming with machine guns and Nazi banners and chanting things like "into the oven" and, a person being killed by someone in a car. It was a whole summer of anticipation. So there was this really slow, long buildup with lots of troubling and triggering events that we hadn't really seen before in that particular way anywhere, including the Ku Klux Klan coming here and, Proud Boys and other white supremacists coming and kind of occupying downtown area, so that I would be going with my kid to go get ice cream, and I would look on social media and someone would be like, the Proud Boys are down there, don't go there, or go there and yell at them, or whatever it was. So it was a very long experience. At any rate, what it led me to was in the year after, thinking, what do I do with this? And how should we respond to this? And here I am. So I was born and raised in Virginia. I've lived in Charlottesville for 20 years, but I was born in Northern Virginia. I went to school in the Shenandoah Valley, and it's unequivocally just my home, just, the way a state is just uncontroversially home to you. And then here were people who were kind of very emphatically saying, because I'm myself, because of my skin, because of my culture, this shouldn't be your home. And so the novella was in a really big way me trying to figure out or exploring that idea of how I don't always feel at home in Virginia, even in small ways, even aside from those people, and my awareness and my not engaging with some of the history that's so difficult and so hard to look at, just kind of like what we were saying before, and not just with them, but just this long history leading back to the founding fathers. So we live here in Charlottesville and Monticello. Thomas Jefferson's plantation home is just like 10 minutes from my house. And so that's how I kind of came to write this novella. And I used so many details of Charlottesville and of the Unite the Right rally, including the fact that we had a helicopter crash. And so in the story, planes can't fly in the sky. It's this time of unraveling. But then I also kind of side by side put all these details that I love about Charlottesville as well. And all the things, I situated the neighbors in the neighborhood that's literally around the corner from my street, and thought about the kinds of students I teach, and thought about the kind of people that I see in the community. So it was kind of a look at those two things side by side, and what would happen if we let that kind of extremism and hate just go unfettered, and also if we don't take care of our infrastructure and our planet. So it's kind of all pushing on one another. Thinking about that.
Yeah. I mean, again, it's very, it reminded me of the way that Octavia Butler talks about cycles of history, and about how, when systems fail, hatred is one of the things that people use as a crutch. But the action of the story of retaking my Monticello is so very, very powerful. Tanisha is a descendant of Sally Hemings and Thomas Jefferson. And so, you could argue, if birthright is a thing, that she belongs there more than anyone else. And yet people come to try to force her out of it. What has been the reception like in Charlottesville and Monticello to this?
That's so interesting. So the reception in Charlottesville, from my perspective, has been like kind of fabulous. I think also everyone's been stuck in their house during a pandemic for a really long time. And so to see someone, because I've been a public school teacher here for a really long time, both in the county and the city, and teaching art means I just teach a ton of people's kids. So I just know a lot of people from that venue, as well as friends and just other people in the community. And so people have been really excited about it. And I feel like because of social media and people knowing what you're doing, the other day I was walking down the street and someone just pulled their car over and yelled out the window, "I'm almost done with the audio tape. It's so good." And I was like, I don't know who that is. I don't know what's going on. I'm in my sweatpants walking my dog down the street. But it's kind of lovely. Happily, the book has gotten a lot of local press too. So I've been on the 2 local papers, and on the front of the 2 local papers. So my parents are happily collecting, even though I'm a very grown person, they are happily collecting all the little bits. But it's been really well received. And then for Monticello, I kind of had the thought early on, or someone suggested to me early on, that I should reach out to them. So I had reached out to them way before the book. As soon as I sold the book, way before I knew how it was going to land in the world, or before it had much attention, when I had a few blurbs and I explained my intention, one thing they did that was really great is they have some relationships with the descendant community. So I reached out through them to be able to just let people know in the descendant community that I existed, and that I'd written this book that uses this fictional descendant, and what my intentions were. And they helped with that. But other than that, they were kind of quiet for a while. But in the end, once they saw the book and read the book, and they saw what it was, they really embraced it. And I've only had 2 live events, both here in Charlottesville, because of COVID-19. And the second one was at Monticello, and it was really lovely. In the story, the characters kind of drive up to Monticello and they land on the Welcome Pavilion, which is kind of the lower modern space with a bookstore and a cafe and a theater. And my characters stay there a couple days before they go up to the historic house. And so we had a reception in the Welcome Pavilion outside. And it was just really interesting to read what was happening right there in that space, and to just think about it and have actual Black descendants of Monticello. There were a few that came, which was really neat, that I got to meet for the first time. And so it was really interesting. So they've actually really been supportive at this point.
It's amazing. There's such a, on top of all of the disaster that's happening in the story, there's this really delicious, like, childhood, like, night at the museum quality to it, where, the matriarch in the story sleeps in Thomas Jefferson's bed, which is all like weird and old. And yeah, imagining reading that story in the place that has already been taken by the story, that's kind of gives me the shivers. It's really cool.
I love that, what you said, the night in the museum. I love that. I love, the story has a lot of like tense and intense moments in it, but there is this kind of, for me, it was really fun because I've been to Monticello a handful of times, pardon me, before I wrote this book. And it's, it's beautiful. It's really well cared for. It has all these interesting gadgets and all these interesting ideas. And, when I first went there, it was just a very lauding view of Jefferson as this kind of archetypal everyman thing. And I think they've definitely moderated and changed over years, slowly but surely. But I always felt a little outside of it, just as a Black person and a Black American, there's just a kind of screaming of what's not being said or what's being really pressed into a very small space compared to what else is being emphasized. And so for me, looking at Unite the Right and all of that, and having someone say this is not your home really pushed me to think about, well, what would it feel like if I was comfortable there, or what if it was mine, or what would it feel like to be able to touch all the things and not feel fettered. So I really tried to have fun with the idea that these characters who decide we're not going to destroy this place for the sake of, also say this is our temporary home and we're going to use the things. That was really fun.
Yeah, and the title of the collection and of the story becomes so multivalent in that way. So there's a repossession, and then there's also like this loving aspect to that my there, to say my Monticello, like you belong to me now, and all of the things that entails. I find that your titles in general are extremely powerful. Like Control Negro is something that, as a white woman, I feel really uncomfortable saying a lot of the time when I'm trying to get people to read it. They're like, wait, who are you? What are you? What's your intention? And so I wonder how do you come to your titles?
That's such a good question. I don't know. It's like the magic of writing, but I will say with Control Negro, that title absolutely came to me. So in the story, the conceit is that his son is like a scientific control against the privilege of white people. So it's like there's this comparison. And then there's also that idea of, the father exerting control on the son, and also that kind of self-control that I will say myself as a Black person feels like you have to just survive in the world. And I think other Black people and people of color may feel that there's ways that you self-edit and control yourself to survive certain situations. So, but I was really nervous about the title. There is something about it that is confrontational, but I had a friend in my writer group was like, that's the perfect title. And it really was, because it takes you to the core of the story right away and it draws you in. As far as the My Monticello, I mean, those are probably the two best titles, really. It gives it to you there. I mean, I think there's this way when people hear it, My Monticello, they might think historical fiction, but when you see that word, the way that we portray it, it's written, this handwritten my next to the word Monticello, that there's going to be something different here, that there's going to be some twist on this, that this is now, that this is the future, this is what, it's just a different kind of view into this place. Yeah.
It's interesting that you bring up, I'm just going to show everybody the book cover so that you know what we're talking about.
Oh, We can't see you, but I'll hold it up for you.
Oh, okay.
I'll hold it up.
It's interesting that you bring up the jacket design. I wonder. I think it's a very powerful jacket. It has it has Monticello on the top, but a red sky, and then water underneath it. Did you have any input in the jacket design, or were there any iterations? How did that go?
Yeah, luckily I felt really fortunate because being a visual art teacher, I had like a tiny bit of cachet. I was like, I'm not just any old schmo, because so they actually listened. The folks at Holt actually were really kind and listened to me and let me say my 2 cents. But they really came up with the basic idea of the facade of Monticello. Absolutely came from them, and then myself and my agent, are both of our agents, we looked at kind of we were able to just give suggestions around the edges. So in the original cover there was almost like this sooty, like black stippled something over everything, and I think we wanted it to be where you first look at it, it's beautiful, and then only later when you think about the story does it look maybe like the sky is on fire. Do you know what I mean? Like just a little bit more subtle in that sense. And that felt like, this is like literary fiction that is a little bit hybrid-y. There's a little bit of speculative, there's a little bit of surrealism in it, as opposed to like a total genre, the zombie movie where the white supremacists are coming from. There's an element of that, but that's not really where the heart of the stories are. It's really about characters, and hopefully you're with them and really thinking about not only the characters, but the ideas that they're grappling with. Like, what if the history of enslaved people were treated with as much care as the history of the founding fathers? And what's lost when someone is otherized, not only for the people who are otherized, but for the people who are in the end group? What is the cost of that for our nation, and where does our energy lie, and who gets to claim home? And why would someone who's a descendant both through Thomas Jefferson and through an enslaved person still not feel at home in this place, through both, and so yeah, so we wanted it to, I don't know. Anyway, the cover was really fun to think about, and I'm really pleased with how it turned out. So that was nice.
I think that it really does do a lot of that. It's amazing how these themes travel all the way through the collection, and even to the story that preceded it, to the King of Sandria, which that title too is wonderful because it sounds like it's the king of some magical place, but really just talking about Alexandria. And you've talked a little bit already about place and about home. But I wonder how you feel about your relationship to the South and to Virginia now. Has it changed? Does writing about it help? I don't know.
Yeah, it's interesting. Virginia is such a kind of it's part of the South, but it's right at the edge. Especially growing up in Northern Virginia, that felt very cosmopolitan. There were a lot of different people from all over the world where I was. But all my cousins and all my extended family is from South Carolina, so that's like my second home. So like my parents, especially when they kind of went aspirationally north, like they migrated for jobs, but really they went back to South Carolina all the time. So when I was a kid, it was literally like every other weekend driving 10 hours with like the car filled up and like pillows around my head, and just like seeing all my cousins, and they would like basically summer camp me. I would just go be dropped off and stay with cousins for weeks on end. So I think that idea of home was always a little bit complicated for me in this interesting way, because my parents really claim both. They would go home to South Carolina and then they come back home to Virginia. And even now they literally are in South Carolina, like taking pictures for someone's wedding and, at any rate. So writing about Virginia, I don't know, in a weird way, it made me reclaim it. Like I said, it's an unequivocally home. It's unequivocally mine. There's ways in which I feel outside of it for sure. But it was writing about some of those fears was helpful, I think, to me, just as a catharsis, because I think I've said this before, but it's just true. If I put my worries out in the world, if I talk about the things that feel true to me, then I feel like you all can worry about them too. And I don't have to, you know, I know they aren't something that one individual can fix or this group of characters can fix alone. There's a big push in the stories for this idea of community, of the collective, of our connection, whether we recognize it or not, how everything is threaded to everything else. And I feel like my responsibility is to try to be a reasonable human being and to say and share what I feel is true. And as I learn differently, I can share differently. It doesn't have to be a perfect truth. There can be multiple truths. There can be contradicting truths. But these things I've felt to be true, and I want to put them in the world, including the good, the bad, and the ugly, so that we can, ruminate on it together and hopefully, make choices that are helpful and that are good, hopefully.
Yeah. I think it really does do that work. I mean, having, been sharing your work for several years now, I've had people come back to me and be like, oh my God, I read Jocelyn's story and it made me think this and it made me think that. I wonder what are some of the books that you have felt like sort of extended a hand to you for any reason, that have made you feel less alone and connected to others in the community?
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Like the books I love are all over the place, but some early ones, you mentioned Octavia Butler earlier. I actually hadn't read Parable of the Sower until after I wrote this book, but I did read a lot of her other work, and I'd read Kindred, which is an amazing story that also uses kind of this hybrid conceit of time travel and, this kind of at the center of a story, but to talk about race, to talk about slavery, to talk about why someone would make the decisions they made within that experience that we might not be able to relate to. And I thought that was a really big inspiration for me in this story. I kind of do something similar and think about that. Writers say again.
Sorry, I was going to say that Kindred also, it makes so much sense that Kindred was something that you thought of, because there's this sense of being, if anybody has not read it yet, a woman in, contemporary times like the 80s gets pulled back, like literally through her wall into the time of her ancestors as a slave owner and an enslaved woman, and asked to basically come to their aid almost in order to get herself back into the present. And there is this kind of time slippage that happens in my Monticello that it makes sense that you were thinking of that.
Absolutely. And I think, I don't know if I knew this before I wrote it, but I think Octavia Butler said that she wrote that because someone said, well, why would slaves comply the way they did? I think maybe even a Black person, it might not have been a white person. And she was like, you're so dumb. Let me write this book to say why people would do what they do. I just thought that was so interesting. And there's a way that I relate to that kind of instinct. Definitely like Toni Morrison. Beloved was a book I read really early on, and I just read it on my own without any kind of context for it. But there's this way that, and probably in all her books, but definitely in that one, I'm using something that's so obscene and so unspeakable as the center of a story that has so much care and humanity in it. And also having like the surreal conceit in that book. There's a ghost that's haunting, there's just so much there, but it's treated so naturally. It's treated not as if it's science fiction. It's treated as if it fits so neatly into the world. And I think that I really relate to that kind of instinct, and I really appreciate it, and definitely strive to have that feeling be there. So yeah, those are two things that I love.
I was speaking to Lady Hubbard last spring for a Tennessee Williams event, and she got to study with Toni Morrison in her undergrad. And Lady Hubbard, if any of you, if anybody doesn't know, she writes these stories that are also situated in a reality that's a little bit shifted. Like people have these really special talents. They might be able to, scale walls or smell, all the ingredients in a sauce or something like that. And Lady was telling me that she had brought these stories with these fantastical elements to Toni Morrison as an undergraduate, thinking that she was doing something wrong, that they were like stupid fairy tales. And Toni Morrison said to her, like, listen, reality isn't going to accommodate all of our truth. Like, you have to make a space for what you need to say. And she just took that and ran with it. The books are brilliant. And it's wonderful to have mentors like that.
I love that. That's amazing.
What mentors have you had in your writing life?
Oh my gosh. I was thinking about this. It's not that I haven't had anyone help me, because I've had tons of help and tons of community, but I don't know if I've had an actual real mentor. There was one writer, a writer named Lauren Winner, who wrote a book called Girl Meets God, which is nonfiction, about being Jewish and then kind of, I don't know if so much as becoming Christian, but thinking about Jesus as the Messiah, whatever. At any rate, she's super smart. And I took a class with her, a creative nonfiction class with her many years ago. And she read my first essay and said, oh my God, you have to get an MFA. And it was just interesting that someone was excited. I'd been writing a really long time, and I'd loved writing for a really long time. And it was such a interesting sensation to have someone look at my writing. And it wasn't just that she said that, it was that she, for all of us in the class, she went sentence by sentence and word by word and kind of gave it the care that you would get in an MFA, which I didn't really, she thought about each thing, and she was like, this is working. This sounds like Jamaica Kincaid. I'm not sure about that. And there was this way that she did it that made me think, oh, maybe I should try to make my writing better and treat it with that much care and attention, and even maybe put it out into try to go send it to some small journal and try to just try to find a place where we'll have a tiny bit more audience. So I think I credit her with just sending me on the path of just not of writing, but just writing for an audience in a more specific way, and really thinking it was important in a different way.
I'm very grateful to her too. I think we all must be. It's such an extraordinary book, and I'm so glad that it's out in the world. I think we are out of time for tonight, by my clock at least. And so I'm going to invite ER back up to tell you some good stuff.
Yeah, thank you both so much. This was lovely. I would love for folks to click this teal button at the bottom center of your screen to buy my Monticello from Karis. You can also buy Morgan's book from Karis, which we would love if you have not read her work. It really does help us. You can also recommend it to your local library. So if you don't have the funds, no worries. Please do recommend it to your public library as well as to your kids' like high school library. It's the more we can kind of get the word out and get these books into schools and public libraries, the more folks can enjoy them. So that's always a great way to support authors as well. Thank you both so much for this conversation. Jocelyn, I hope that this book continues to be a great success. I suspect it will be. And, we would love to have both of y'all back for an in-person event at some point, whenever that's safe and possible. But until then, I hope that y'all's families stay safe and well, and that you get to enjoy this time of success.
Thank you so much, ER. Thank you so much, C. Morgan.
Thank you, Jocelyn. It was so nice to talk to you, and thank you, ER. I hope I get there too.
Yeah, take care. Bye-bye.
Take care. Have a good night, everybody.